I'm going to start very basic in terms of like what actually happens in an enterprise deal cycle, and then I'll get a little bit more into mentalities. But typically there's this like marketing and content phase. I'm a huge believer in content. I've seen it work really well for my clients. So I would think about that. How are you activating interest without actually selling? I'm a sales coach, but again, I'm a huge believer that you need to also get your brand and opinions out there before people are ready to buy. But today I'm going to focus on from like first call to close primarily. So after the marketing brings your leads into interest, then there's outreach, right? Which is a little bit different than the scaled outbound or the scaled marketing, because you're actually one-on-one, maybe LinkedIn messaging, maybe some of you are using email. I think email is very noisy, so we could talk about how to break through the noise there. And then you land that discovery and intro pitch, that first call. So that's kind of what we started to mock with Juan. Typically in enterprise sales, I always say like your first pitch, your goal isn't to sell your product actually, which is kind of counterintuitive. It's to get to that next step. Because again, at a company like Square, that person's not going to make the decision, right? Like there's no decision maker, single decision maker in enterprise. So how do you get to that next follow-up pitch and demo and make that really powerful with a group of stakeholders? After that, typically there's a proof of concept or an evaluation. With AI, I think it's really exciting because you could see the value really quickly. And so a lot of my clients are starting to do sometimes 1-2 week POCs, even with large enterprise companies. And then there's this period where you actually formalize, you send the pricing proposal. And then that's when the negotiation starts. I've unfortunately, never been in a situation where I haven't given a discount, but that's also part of the name of the game in enterprise, right? It's a partnership back and forth. Then you go into security legal, with something like Hexagon, you guys are handling a lot of sensitive data, right? So I'm sure there's heavy vetting of that. And then usually there's a final pricing negotiation. Oftentimes at a company like Square, there's actually a professional negotiator whose main job is to get a better deal, right? So the gap between this and this is really important, right? A lot of founders actually end up undercutting their price. And then when they get here, they don't have a lot of room, right? And that's why you end up like actually losing quite a bit of value when you actually finalize the pricing. Yeah. So I think what you should start thinking about is first, like, what is the impact you're making, right? Like, is it like, are you making them like 5x more revenue? Are you saving them X dollars in costs, right? And then figure out from there what would make you proud in terms of the difference between the value and what you're pricing. Typically, the value and what you're pricing, there's a huge gap, right? Like there's companies that are saving companies $10 million and their product costs like 500K, right? But you first like set that stake. And then what you do is if folks are like, hey, it's too expensive, that's actually a great place to be in. That's something I tell a lot of founders mentality wise. Like if somebody takes your pricing and they're like, sure, send me the order form, you've done something wrong, right? Because if somebody says it's too expensive, you unlock the conversation around why is it a premium, right? And I'm assuming a lot of you are building companies that are one of one, right? You're not getting into the space because you're just like trying to take advantage of the opportunity, right? You actually think there's something special with what you have, right? So that's how I would start thinking about pricing. And then on discounts, you have to think about what the levers are. If you're going to give a 20% discount, what are you getting back, right? Is it like they're going to sign faster? Are they going to allow you to take video of them and put it on LinkedIn? Are they going to tell 5 other farmers that your product is great? And you start trading based off of those levers. And there's no one size fits all for discount is what I want to say too. Oftentimes, I don't know if this is something you guys have thought about, but sometimes people are like, Peter, if I give a 60% discount and then their friend gets a 10% discount, how do I justify? Is this a question that comes up? Kind of? You thought about this? Okay. You might think about it in the future. The way you justify it is that there's always a reason, right? Like, of course, I'm going to give 80% discount to my first customer, but you're not my first customer, right? So you have to be comfortable with that too. Like, of course that person got an 80% discount because look at how much we're talking about them. So if you want an 80% discount, first of all, I can't do that. But if you want to get close to that, are you willing to do this, this, and this for me? So that's my main advice on price is like, think about impact to value, impact to what you're charging, and then how can you extract value out of it outside of the money? because price is not just about price, right? In the early stages. Yeah. So what I would say is like standardize, definitely standardize on pricing. Still be open to discounting, but have that talk track. Yes, like if, by the way, if you talk to 4 other farms in your area, there might be differences in pricing, but it's because there's all these other things that we care about as a company. It's not just about getting money from you. If you're willing to host like a 10-person farmer dinner at like a restaurant nearby and bring in like 10 more leads, I could probably do a little bit better for you on the price, right? And then the other thing too is don't be afraid to say no. It's like, hey, if pricing is the main driver for you, then like we might not be the right solution. Again, like this is something I did at Dropbox, right? Because Box would always undercut us. They'd be like, Peter, the Box rep just emailed 5 of my CIOs saying that he can give it to us for 1/10 of your price. At that point, you got to be like, listen, like we've been talking about the value of this. If we're giving you this much value and this is a huge problem for you, we should work together. If that's not a problem and pricing is a main thing, you should go to another competitor, right? So then in those situations, you have to say, listen, I'm at my limit. And I got to be fair to my other farmers too. There are going to be differences in price, but they're all kind of going to be in range, except for our first farmer. Our first farmer got a really good discount. And I'm at my limit. And so I got to walk away from this. And there's something in sales called strip lining. Have any of you heard of strip lining? Sorry, I know we're way past time now, but I'll mention. Okay, so strip line. Does anybody fish? I don't even fish, so I don't know why I use this analogy all the time. But when a really good fisherman, right, bass fisherman, when they start to feel tugging at the hook, the bait, right, they don't pull the fish in, right? Because then the fish is like, oh, like there's a hook at the end of it. I'm being pulled into something, right? And they're gonna like get scared. So what really good fishermen do is when they feel a little bit of a nibble on the bait, they let go of the slack, because then the fish clamps harder on the hook and then you could pull the fish in, right? So in sales, how does strip lining work? If you feel like there's interest in your product, you shouldn't actually sell hard, right? You should actually try and see if you can walk away from the deal. Because then you clearly understand who needs you and who doesn't. Disqualifying is more important than qualifying. I know I keep using MBC, but it's like kind of my first Fortune 500 memory. So I laugh with Lenny that we said no more than we said yes when we did that deal. It's like, do you have encryption key management? No, we don't. Do you need that? Because if you need that, Box has that. Do you have, how many enterprise features do you have? Well, we have like 4. Centralized billing, single sign-on, and a couple other things. Can you like track if somebody shares a link outside my organization? We can't do that today. Well, Peter, that's really important for security. Well, we don't have that. We'll have that probably in like 2 quarters. Is that critical for the deal? Because if so, we should save our time. So this is what you need to do with pricing too. Is it pricing really? Or is it what we talked about in the beginning? Because the last you told me like 5 minutes ago, you have a huge burning problem, right? So hopefully that helps. It's a very kind of like human thing. It's like, like you're kind of telling them you need me more than I need you. And if you don't need me, let's not talk. So hopefully that helps. Yeah. So strip lining. Okay. And then once you get to final pricing negotiation, you sign the contract and then you kick off with implementation. One thing I'll say about implementation is sometimes these are land and expand deals is what they're called, where you might not land the whole business, right, initially. So at News Corp, for example, we closed like 6,000 licenses initially and then went to 23,000. So I consider the implementation and even meetings after that part of the sales cycle, because rarely, especially with PLG, you're not going to close the whole thing. You're going to have a beachhead and then expand. Yeah, so oftentimes you will show the product, but the difference is in the first call, you're probably showing like 10, 15% of the product and doing more discovery around like how you can unlock other stakeholders in the deal. And then the second call, it's similar, but you go deeper into the product because hopefully you have longer period of time. But you're still doing discovery, like you're still learning from the other stakeholders. So oftentimes it can still feel like a little bit of a repeat, but you are testing your knowledge of the first call and whether or not your champion on the first call or your sponsor is saying the right things, right? So it's like, what's your name? Emily. So it's like, okay, Emily told me on the first call that you have budget for this in the neighborhood of $150,000. Is that right? These are the questions you ask. And she also said, this is the biggest pain point. Is there anything that I misunderstood, or is there any other things that are pains for you all? Because now there's like 3 other people on the call. And then if somebody's not talking, you say, hey, like, you haven't said much. You're the VP of engineering. What is personally interesting to you in all of this, right? So it's a lot of like, that's the big difference, is how do you unlock the multi-stakeholder conversation? Because it's very different from the 1 or even 2% conversation. Okay, cool. Thank you, Emily. I'm going to speed through this. So there's a couple things. I'm talking about a lot of this already, right? People still buy from people they trust. I've learned this time and time again. I've done interviews with like my first, like, I'd say 10 customers over the last like 6 months, 10 years removed. And this is the thing that comes up a lot. They're like, we trusted you and the company. So think about that. Your product's important, of course, but you know, like in this room, probably you're not going to create bad products. So you have to talk about your vision, especially because the product the way it is today is not going to be the way it is even a quarter from now. And then aggressive sales tactics just don't work in enterprise. In fact, the people who are introverted, intentional, soft-spoken, who listen really well are really, really good at sales. It's just that we are hit on the head with the aggressive, like Glengarry, Glen Ross, always be closing, like Wolf on Wall Street. Those are the archetypes that are stereotyped. But those types of sales just don't work, especially with the technical product. So what does that mean? Be honest and credible, highly opinionated, and then the calm, collected, and measured people really win out. So I'm going to give a couple tips. I'm going to breeze through this. So let me know if you want to slow down, but want me to slow down. One thing is never have your pitch be one-sided. I see this all the time. I listen to a lot of calls. I probably listen to like hundreds of calls at this point from founders. And it's very rare when I see talk time less than 60%. So we could think about that. And then make sure you're aligning on vision, which requires a lot of back and forth. You're never going to align on vision if you're just pitching, right? So this is might be a little fun exercise. So this is actually a real call that I reviewed. This is a top seller at one of the AI companies that I coached. And it's an hour, 9-minute call. And so these are 2 monologues right here. Can you guess, does anyone guess, like for fun, like how long is this monologue? This is a deck and demo. This person did the deck and demo. Anybody want to guess? Oh, wow. Wasn't that long. Wait, what's going on here? Hold on. Okay, so this is 6 minutes, which, can you imagine that? Like just try talking to a friend for 30 seconds straight without them saying anything. It's brutal, right? You never do that in real life. But this is 6 minutes, right? And then at the end, they ended with, appreciate I spoke a lot there. So they knew they spoke a lot, but then this second monologue was 4 minutes and 7. And then the same thing, I appreciate I kind of ran through a lot there, right? So this is not good because now he's a great seller. Like I think he's doing a lot of good things, and he realized this in the moment too. We all realize when we're going through monologues, but we need to break this up. So in a poor pitch, you're overselling. So I'm going to give you this graphic, which I think is hopefully helpful. A lot of pitches look like this actually, where you're talking, the prospect talks, you know, and then like you talk again, prospect talks, right? But if you look at a call recording, hopefully you all are recording your calls. If not, you should. The pitch should look like this. And even in the deck and demo, you're not presenting the deck and demo straight through, right? You're actually like asking questions like, do you understand what I'm saying? Do you agree with my view of the world, right? So keep this in mind. Tip number 2, follow the breadcrumbs, right? So what is a breadcrumb? Strip lining is not a term that I invented. It's actually from Sandler sales training. Breadcrumbs is something I came up with because I thought it was very visual. So, you know, if you drop a breadcrumb, you're going to pick it up, right? And so in sales, a breadcrumb is a prospect's answer that allows you to follow up with the discovery process without it making it feel unnatural. You know, because one of the worst things in sales is when you are actually reading through a list of questions. And a lot of people, I talk to a lot of prospects too, where they're like, oh, that salesperson, I could just tell they were looking at a list of questions, right? So you still have to ask a lot of questions. Now the trick is, the way you do that is you leverage their verbal cues to ask follow-up questions, and then it feels like a conversation, not a checklist. So let me go through some examples. So let's say you're like, hey, what's driving you to look at something like this? The prospect might say the current tools and processes just aren't working, right? A lot of people just move on from it, but this is a bad answer. Prospects usually give bad answers. This doesn't really tell me much. I kind of could have guessed that something's not working. So you got to like follow the breadcrumb and say, got it, can you dig into what you're using right now and where are there gaps? So it's following the breadcrumb. This one, is there a specific budget you have designated for something like this? We have some, but not much. Again, this is something I hear like 9 out of 10 times. I'm like, great, like that's helpful, right? Yeah, actually, what is the answer? I mean, there's a lot of right answers, but I'm curious, what's your instinct? If somebody's like, yeah, I have some, but not much. Sure. Yeah. So the first one, I would say it's okay, but sometimes as buyers, we're conditioned to, because I vetted a lot of software tools when I was in sales as well, right? Sometimes it feels like, okay, this person's trying to make me do work, right? What's the cost of not moving forward? It's like, well, I don't know, man. Like, I haven't really thought about it that deeply, but maybe like $1 million. Like, I get what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to pin me down so that like it's so much of a pain point, right? So what I would do is, and I didn't say much about like costs of not moving forward here, right? The breadcrumb here is, and thank you for bringing that example up, by the way, because sales training actually tells you to do something like that, right? I would cue off the breadcrumb and say like, what's in the neighborhood of not much for you, right? And if you've presented pricing, you could say, is what we're presenting reasonable, or is this like completely out of what your expectations are, right? So I think kind of like following the breadcrumbs and like really zeroing down can help. Who do you ultimately report to? This is, oftentimes people are scared to ask this, and I would say like, don't be scared, because a lot of time, and people understand decisions are made in like consensus driven, hierarchical, it depends on the company, right? So you need to know the matrix of the organization. So I ask this question all the time. Who do you ultimately report into? It's just helpful for me to get a lay of the land. And then they say something like, oh, I report into operations, because they don't want to answer it, right? They're like, something super broad. So from there, should we do that same thing again, or should I just go through it? Yeah. Does everybody want to answer this one? What's your name, by the way? Jordan. Thank you, Jordan. Appreciate it. Yeah. Bingo. Perfect. Actually, I think I put that there. Is a COO your direct manager, or is it this person by chance? Right. And sometimes I even do this live on a call. Like, you don't want to be distracted on a call, but you could just put in like COO and company name and just take a shot at it, right? And even if it's wrong, it's good. Because if it's wrong, then you're like, oh, okay, who is your direct manager then, right? You follow the breadcrumb. Within what time frame do you want to make a decision on something like this? So let's say the prospect says, oh, this happens all the time, by the way, this answer, because they're like so excited about your product, right? And they're like, oh, honestly, like, I wish I had this yesterday. And it's like, that is like the worst answer you could get as a salesperson. So what would you say to this? There's no wrong answer. I'm just going to give feedback on the answer. Yeah, that's a good one, actually. Yeah, that's a really good one. Just to get closer to what is the actual time frame, right? So I would say something like, hey, like, I'd probably laugh and say like, that's great to hear, but I guess realistically, what does that actually mean for you? Based off of other evaluation processes you've led, does that mean a month, few months, a year? Because I know there's like the reality of making decisions at Square, right? So similar, it's like, okay, follow the breadcrumb. Don't let them get away with bad answers, and drill into what does that actually mean for this relationship, because we can't go back in time. Okay, I don't know if I have one more. Nope, that's it on breadcrumbs. So hopefully that's helpful to give you a sense for how to engage in a two-way discussion. The last tip I'll leave with before we get into a group session is, remember, not every lead is a deal. You have to really qualify what's real and what's not. I think early in my career, I'd be excited about logos, right? And I had NBC Universal, CBS, Disney. They're all in the same industry, but there's different appetite for actually purchasing your product. And so in sales, the most important thing is how you disqualify, especially if you have limited time, which we all have, right? 15 minutes of your time is a long time. So if you're spending 15 minutes with somebody who's a skeptic, who's just going to grill you and not really like buy into the dream, you've wasted a ton of your calories. And there's probably an innovator out there that could use your time. And make sure to get to that, you need to align and not pitch, right? You can't pitch your product in an overly salesy way, right? It's aligning on your vision. So this is the one and only framework I'll talk about. I guess we talked about strip lining and some other things, but has anybody heard of BANT, the acronym BANT? Yeah. So it's been around for a while. Like this was first coined actually in like, it's funny because I say like I'm coaching modern sales, but I'm using like an old school framework, but I'll tell you like the modern components of it. So BANT has been around since like the 50s, 1950s. It was like first, I think, coined by the IBM sales team. And it was a way to just frame the sales deal, to figure out, okay, how likely is it that I should spend time with this deal? How likely is it that they'll close as a potential customer, right? And so the B in BANT stands for budget. So there's a whole set of questions that you ask around budget to figure out, do they have the propensity to buy, right? A judges the lead on like, are they actually one of the main stakeholders, decision makers, sponsors? How high in the authority chain are they, right? Can they actually impact my deal? Because if not, it's going to make it really hard for you. Need, is there an urgent pain? Which is why you ask these pain questions, because if they don't feel like there's a problem, you're not going to convince them there's a problem, right? You're there to help solve their problems, not convince them that there is a problem. And then the T is timing, right? So like, do they actually have a sense for when they're going to move on a decision with a vendor? So this is BANT. There's other frameworks. If you all have heard of like MEDPIC or MEDIC, and there's a lot of MEDPIC training out there. I've been to a bunch of them just to like observe and audit. And the reason why I stick with BANT is because the more acronyms you have, the more robotic your pitch gets. And so hopefully this is simple enough to help you at least understand the concept of qualifying your lead. So this is kind of like an interesting graphic that I created where when I ran a sales team, I would say, hey, like, if there's $100,000 next to a deal, like you have to have 3 out of 4 BANT, right? Like I'm not going to forecast. I'm not going to tell the CEO, we're going to close like $1 million in revenue if all my deals have like 1, out of the BANT criteria, right? If you're talking to a decision maker, but you don't know if they have budget or timing or a need, like that should not be in the list of deals, right? It's very important because like with investors, you want to impress them, but clarity of the forecast is way more important than like inflating and saying, oh, we have all these like big logos. So BANT, like if you hit 3 out of 4, it can even be 2 out of 4 initially, but you need to define that, make sure folks who are looking at the pipeline know that, and then be really honest about whether or not something is a deal based off of these criteria. So before we get into the group, so the pitch deck, I'll talk about the pitch deck in a little bit, but the pitch deck should help you with BANT, right? The pitch deck isn't like, here's what my product does, like here's how many features we have. It's like, hey, are we aligned? Do you believe my technical differentiators and my long-term vision? And by the way, should I be spending time showing the product in a next call, or should we just part ways and have you follow us when we have more customers, right? Or when you're ready for innovation. Super, hopefully helpful to folks. Okay, cool. So the group exercises, I don't know how many people we should break the groups up into. Maybe like 2, if there's an even number. 2 or 3. Okay, 2. Okay, perfect. Yeah, 2 people in one team, right? So why don't you find a buddy and then evaluate your last 5 sales calls. If you didn't have 5 sales calls, however many you've had. And it'd be interesting to see if there's any patterns when you look at this. So I'll leave this up and then we can come back and maybe like talk about some learnings. Usually actually I won't lead it, but just let's do the exercise first. Yeah. Yeah, anybody want to share some patterns? Like what was the exercise like for you all? Curious. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is a question I get a lot. Is like, do you mention price on the first call or not? And my answer is always mention price on the first call. Because yeah, you just answered your own question. You want to qualify. Are they serious about what I'm building? Because if not, you can move on, right? A lot of you, I think, are trying to close probably your first 10 to 20 customers. You know, like that's a pretty small number, but you're gonna have to go through a lot of no's to get to that, right? So I think like prioritizing that, yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. And don't be scared to ask because if you're not asking, your competitor is going to ask and they're going to have an advantage, right? And you can always explain it. You know, phraseology is so important in these things, right? If you're like, what's your budget? Then people are going to be like, who are you? Why are you asking? You know, but if you're like, hey, do you have budget for something like this already scoped out? I just want to like get on the same page with what our expectation should be for this call. It's very different, right? It's a little bit longer to say, but then they're like, how do they say no to that? You know, usually they're like, oh, that's a very respectful way to ask me what's going on. And they respect their time too. Because if our pricing is way off, you shouldn't say, well, I can give you a discount. You should just say, maybe this is not the right time. Is there a time when this investment could be justified? Because in my mind, you told me all these things about the pain points. I think pretty confidently we can get in there and help you. But if pricing is out of question, I guess I wonder why. It becomes like a much more organic conversation. Yeah, great question. Yeah. Yeah, so honestly, like I don't know if you're gonna like my answer, but it varies per call. Sometimes I'll bring it up in the beginning. That's where breadcrumbs is really important, right? If somebody's telling me, Peter, I have a huge problem, like I'm so glad we're talking, like I hope your product can solve my needs, then I probably bring up budget in the beginning, even before I talk about my product. I'll be like, okay, since you mentioned this is a huge problem, does that mean you already have something scoped out? Like which executives are sponsoring this? I even asked the authority question. Are you the sponsor or, you know, who else? You know, I think it's important for me to understand the logistics of what's going to happen after this call. If you feel like they're skeptical in the beginning of the call and they like hate being sold to, then I say like, you know what? I have a ton more questions, kind of what Juan said, right? I have a ton more questions. I could spend 30 minutes just asking you questions because I'm really curious about your business. See, that's another thing you say, right? I'm really curious about your business. It's very empathetic. But I want to make sure you're coming away from this call knowing what we do too. So why don't I like show you what our company is about and I'll ask you questions throughout. Even then, you don't just go into a pitch. You still like kind of set the expectation you're going to ask questions, but they're like, okay, like this person's not trying to like just close the deal. Does that make sense? But I think it's a requirement to talk about pricing on the first call. And the way you bring it up at the end, by the way, phraseology, it's like, hey, by the way, I didn't, you know, by the way sounds very casual. By the way, I forgot to ask you, I should have asked you this up front, but just so we're on the same page, is there investment for something like this? Because if your team's going to spend time and my team's going to spend time going through this evaluation, I just want to make sure we're in the right ballpark of investment. Again, it's like not like I'm trying to sell you the deal. It's like you're incepting that like, hey, listen, I don't want to waste your time. I also don't want to waste my time. And it shows them that you know how to prioritize as well. Is that helpful? And that you're a lot more confident. Yeah. I love that question because have you all heard of this term design partnerships? Right? It's a very dangerous term. It's a loaded term, right? And let me tell you why, right? Because typically when you bring up design partnership, customers think this is free, right? And free doesn't attract power to the table, right? Free is like kind of like a toy, right? It's an experiment. And I know we're in the design school, right? But like design partnership kind of to me has a negative connotation because I've seen a ton of clients rabbit hole on like 5 design partners, you know, because they're like, oh, it's Netflix or it's Nike. And then towards the end of the design partnership, they're not able to get to that hurdle of paid, right? So I think what you should all do is actually not position this as a design partnership, but to Perry's point, have that conversation. This is a category creating moment for your industry. We believe that. Do you believe that too? Okay, great. Then, sorry, not you. I know you're, yeah, but I'm saying like, I would say that to the prospect. Are we on the same page? Like there's nothing like this that exists. Yes. Okay, great. So like thinking about this from an existing software spend won't make sense, which is why we're talking a lot about the impact. And truth be told, we don't actually have like we're close to an MVP, but our first 10 customers are going to co-build the product with us. The only thing we ask for is a deposit of $50,000. Because why is it $50,000? Let's say, like, why would I pay $50,000 for a product that doesn't exist? You're crazy, Emily, right? Well, the reason why is because, you know, as I told you from the intro, my background is in X, Y, and Z. I've researched this pretty deeply, and you're getting my founding team's time once, twice a week, and your fingerprints are going to be on the product, right? So you're going to see, and we're only keeping it to 10, right? 50,000 times 10, 500K. That should be hopefully an exciting number for startups. We're just keeping it to 10 because we want to make sure we're solving for the same pain. So do you want to be part of that or you know, not? Because we can also come back to you once we have a product in market, but at that point, you know, our roadmap is going to be a little bit more rigid. And then you ask the question, like, what category of a buyer are you in, right? No wrong answer. I just want to make sure we're setting expectations. And then now, like, if they say 50,000 is too much, you obviously don't just shut the door and say, like, I know I'm kind of being dramatic here just to like tell you to disqualify, but there could be a conversation. Okay, if 50,000 is too much, what is like reasonable to you? Because like I said, you know, like even if we were just doing pure consulting, it'd be like $50,000 for 2 months. You could hire a consulting firm and it would cost you more than that. But, you know, I'm bringing in like domain experts. We've obsessed over this problem. And so we just want to be compensated for our time and thinking. And again, you're going to have this product that I'm pretty sure is going to solve that pain you talked about. So that's how I would think about it. And it's a little bit, again, like it might be a little bit counter to what is told sometimes from investors because investors like to see logos, right? But I think they're getting savvier now where it's not just logos. It's like, are they actually ready to pay you, right? And so I would accelerate that discussion. Because you don't want to do a design partnership with a logo that doesn't turn into a deal. That's the worst.